Okay, I think I'm gonna welcome everybody this evening. It's 7 o'clock, and we've got a fair number of people here already, so I think it's okay to get started. Welcome to our final work session for NT Planning and Visioning. Thank you all for participating over the past several months. Your comments have been helpful, and the conversation has been useful for the purposes of our visioning. And it was nice to get to know some of you who aren't members of the board, and we don't get to see quite as often. I just want to make sure everybody is aware where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Obviously, we've been through 6 workshops. This is our 7th, and tonight the purpose is to kind of go through the policies and make sure that those that we think represent the sentiments of this group are accurate. The contributions that you've made over the course of the past several months have given us a good sense of the pulse of the room, and that's what we're trying to incorporate into the report that will ultimately be generated through these workshops. So the consultant team is going to go through some of those policies tonight, and you'll have one last opportunity to give some feedback. We don't know that we'll necessarily get 100% agreement on every topic, but we're hoping to have, a good sense that everybody, or not that everybody, that most people are on the same page. And in some cases that may elicit a lively discussion, and in other topics it may be more straightforward, but our consultants will deal with that as we go through it. Now, going forward, in early January, our consultants will provide staff with a draft of the report. In late January, that will be a final report. And at that point, the CA Board of Directors will be provided a copy of that report. Because February is a very busy month in CA with budgeting, the board will have more or less the entire month of February with that document in their hands to consider, to read through. And then in early March, it'll come up at a board meeting for discussion. And in late March, it'll come up at a board meeting for a vote. So there is a lot of time between now and then. Now is really just making sure that we understand your sentiments and what should go into that document. And that document will then hopefully be adopted in the spring. So that's where we are now, and that's where we're going. And again, thank you all for being part of these discussions and for part of this visioning. And hopefully you felt that your voices made a difference in some of the decisions that we're embarking on, and some of the paths that ultimately CA will be choosing for Columbia into the future. So thank you again. This is the final workshop, so I hope it's a good one.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. I think I could say on behalf of our whole team, we really appreciate the time that you've spent with us and the good thinking over the past 7 workshops. And especially we threw a lot at you over the past couple of weeks, and homework and surveys and getting the review of the policies. And we really appreciate those of you that took the time to get us feedback back and a little bit of back and forth. So we appreciate that. Steve, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, I'm trying.
Okay. So with the agenda where we are, we're going to first go through some of the survey. We had 2 surveys, one on focus areas for the general plan update, and then also indication of where to take a pulse of where housing might go. Ori's going to review those survey results with you, see if you have any comments. And then Steve's going to go through the refined draft policies. Yeah, we're not sure how it'll break out, but about 8 o'clock we'll do a break. So we may cover a lot in the first half, or we may cover less, but we'll just see how it goes. And around 8 o'clock, take a break. And then we'll close with next steps. As we've done in the past, we'll have discussion after each of these segments. Next slide. So as you can see, as a process, we're here at the final workshop, the final policy framework, and we know a lot of input has been going back and forth, and we've what Steve's going to be reviewing tonight incorporates some of your comments and that you've reacted to over the past couple of weeks. So we'll share that. And then Paul, in a couple of minutes, I'll get to you. I know you have your hand up, so I'll get to you. I'll finish this part up first.
Okay, thank you.
So from our last workshop 6, themes, we had a lot of discussion, some general things that came up. There's a lot of discussion about how the general plan update and the CA planning and visioning dovetails. We had some clarification on the Newtown charrette and what the focus is on land use and design and not zoning. We had some discussion on redevelopment, a number of topics. I'm not going to go through all of these. Some things that came up that were very important was we can't separate transportation from that equation. And then we need to really think about what areas to include in the Newtown charrette. Governance came up, and we talked about a number of topics. One, we don't want to forget that Columbia is community oriented when we look at this, and that CA is a spokesperson for the community. We need to clarify its role with respect to Columbia and how representative it is. Next slide. And then we had some discussion on zoning and some discussion, the distinction between standards and guidelines, the importance of maintaining Columbia's signature, a lot of discussion on concerns related to the out parcels and the lack of clarity for Columbia's boundary, and then resident involvement and the importance of that and whether that happens up front in determining standards and guidelines or as part of a project review process. So with that, Steve, next slide. So before we get into this, before Ori talked about the survey, Paul, did you have a comment quickly?
Yeah, good evening. First, I was told that there would be a vote on these policies that we will go over tonight. I cannot vote on it since Oakland Mills has not seen these policies. Second, I volunteer and do not appreciate the 79-page slide deck given out 36 hours prior to a meeting. How can anyone make an intelligent review with an impossible deadline? So I have no comments tonight. Third, the statement of work for the consultants does not include any mention of affordable housing, yet that appears to be the focus. Fourth, this meeting was not advertised on CA's website as dealing with policies. Finally, certain items included do not have any bearing at all and should not be included because they are not part of the general plan. So I suggest that there be no vote tonight and only have these policies, as well as any others that may be proposed, provided to all the Columbia Village boards prior to any positions taken by CA for the update to the general plan. Thank you.
Okay. Kristen, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there is no vote tonight. This tonight is an opportunity for the participants to chime in one last time as to your sentiments and the pulse of the room, and the consultants will then have the assurance that the policies that we've been discussing and that the team of participants that your sentiment is accurately reflected in their document. As I mentioned in the intro, the vote will be in March.
If I could just make one comment, the PowerPoint, there's nothing new in the PowerPoint. All the content of the PowerPoint was actually distributed last week. I think it was it on Friday, Kristen?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, so the actual framework policy was sent out last Friday. The PowerPoint is only putting the content in a PowerPoint format, but there's no difference in the content from what you received almost a week ago. So.
Okay. Ori, do you want to?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to just present to you the results of the 2 surveys we had sent out, dealing first with the focus areas that the general plan is going to address. 6 focus areas, or up to 6 focus areas that we're going to address. Thanks, Tom. And in terms of these, here were, and we got 13 responses overall. Here was the choices made for village centers. So in this instance, Oakland Mills got the largest number, and as you can see, Longreach and Harper's Choice were next, followed by Owen Brown. The next slide shows the other areas that were chosen, and Gateway is overall here clearly the winner, and Southern River Parkway Corridor after that. So this is, I guess, helpful sentiment to pass along to the county as a snapshot in time of what this group felt were the ones to focus on. The next one was a little more comprehensive. We got something like 70% of respondents of the 19 of you to this one. And if you recall, we'd put together a map with a bunch of different areas as candidates for potential future housing. And I'll walk through the results that we got. The first one deals with how much housing people felt was appropriate. And you can see there's a wide range here. 10%, which is something like 4,000, was the most significant choice, and then 20 and 30% were the next up. The average would amount to about 6,000 homes. This excluded the town center approved development in the pipeline, that excluded. So in terms of the distribution of these additional housing units, you'll see that they were distributed differentially over the villages. And the next slide shows you that overall, most of the housing elected, almost half of it, was felt to go to the village centers, and then it fell off very sharply after that, with Gateway and the GE Dobbin Snowden area getting 15%, the Southern River Parkway Corridor 6, almost 10 for commercial complexes over 40 years old, and so on down, with ADUs, accessory dwelling units in single family dwelling areas being 3%, and duplex conversions being 2.5% roughly, and so forth and so on. So this is the kind of spatial distribution. And the last slide summarizes the sentiment from the group about housing affordability. Workforce housing, defined as you see it, got just over a quarter in terms of how much was deemed desirable. Middle income, or moderate income, it should actually be moderate income, 21%, and low income just under 10%. So that is the set of results. Any comments, questions from anyone?
Dick has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, I sent a note to Kristen about this. I'm not sure what the relevance of any of that is. We're a bunch of amateurs trying to develop tactics. And this really is going to depend on a lot of demographic and economic information that we should be focusing on the big picture. We should be focusing on what we want Columbia to look like. And then it's up to specialists, experts, to decide how we do that and how many affordable housing units we need is a demographic question, is an economic question. How much workforce housing we need. It's an economic question. And I chose not to participate in this survey because I don't know. I think 10% low income is doing our fair share in the state to help people get a leg up. And but looking at some of these other categories, I don't know. I have no idea, and I don't think any of us do right now. I think we should be focusing on the big picture. Oh, and let me say one more thing. I noticed that you want to put 3.3% more housing in Dorsey Search, and that would be wonderful, but Dorsey Search is all built out. We have two tiny little parcels that are left. One which is currently occupied by single family detached houses that are all 50, 60 years old. And the other which is a developer spent 4 years trying to do something with, and until he put $5,000 in political contributions into the mix, nothing was happening on that. Now it seems to be a high priority among certain members of our county council. So these numbers are irrelevant.
Brad, you had a similar comment in the chat. Did you want to talk about that at all?
I guess to echo at least part of Dick's sentiment, maybe not all of it. I had a hard time putting my numbers in context here and kind of understanding, what does it actually mean when I say, for example, I want 5% in Owen Brown Village Center. That's a certain number of units, and how many acres are available. I'm not all that familiar with many of the other village centers, so when I put numbers in those other village centers is kind of a wild guess. And so I guess I would maybe temper a little bit of the sentiment and say take the input with a grain of salt, because I agree with Dick's sentiment that we're not very well informed in terms of answering these questions this way. I mean, I think it's interesting information. It's interesting information to gather, but I certainly would look at it with a bit of a grain of salt.
So if I could just partially respond, I agree with the grain of salt notion, and not that anyone would treat this as gospel. It's partly that the county, as part of its own outreach effort, is doing this kind of thing countywide and is collecting certainly hundreds of responses like this. They have a comparable game, which is more complicated, about allocating growth to get, quote unquote, the people's sentiment and their ideas, informed or uninformed. And I think it's useful to have some somewhat collective response from Columbia in terms of its sentiment, so that at least you all have some sense of your general priorities. And I think there is a sense here of general priorities to be tempered by expert opinion and the whole planning process. But at least this way you're opining together with a lot of other people. And I think it ensures somewhat of a level playing field in terms of input.
I would just comment that I agree. I think this, getting into individual village centers, I think is probably pretty tough because each one is different. And there's a lot of nuance that goes into that. And you can see there, I don't know that there's a whole lot learned from it anyway. This one I do find interesting though. I mean, taking the pulse of this group in terms of, if first of all you had to answer, should there be some more housing in Columbia? And the answer was yes, to a limited, moderate amount. But then it's like, well, what are the kind of overarching high level generalized opinions on where that should be located? And I was frankly surprised by this answer. I was expecting a much heavier focus on Gateway, Getty's, Snowden River, these larger potential redevelopment areas that are, could be redeveloped with more housing and office and mixed use, and with sort of reduced with traffic impacts being more outside the villages. I would have thought that would have been an easy sort of position to take, but it wasn't. It was like, no, our village centers are what needs repositioning, and this is and housing can help pay for that. And at least that's how I sort of, read the answer. And I thought it was a robust answer. And also the fact that there was so little interest in sort of intensifying the existing neighborhoods, the duplexes and the ADUs and so forth was like, yeah, no, not real comfortable with that. Don't see a lot of opportunity there. So I think in terms of, this group, this particular one was very educational for me anyway.
Thanks. I do want to get to Jenny. You've had your hand up for a while, Jenny.
Okay. Can we keep this slide up right now?
Sure.
I just found we didn't have enough choices. For example, I didn't see anything unless we're talking about the commercial complex covers them all. But retail is getting to be a real problem. Stores are leaving, et cetera. I was thinking if we think out of the box, maybe we need residential in the mall itself. The other thing was down in the Guilford Industrial Park around Berger Road, they have the Humanum workshop for individuals with disabilities. It's been there forever. What if I don't know if it would allow for this, but what if we built some housing next to that population would use? Because they're always looking for residential housing, group homes, et cetera, in apartments, and then they got the transportation issue. So I didn't see anything that allowed for that. I put those ideas down, but maybe they went under other, I don't know.
That's where they would have gone, yeah. And the notion, Jenny, was that the older commercial complexes was meant to pick up some of that, those ones that are more than 40 years old. There's a fair amount of acreage, and the notion was they could be converted to residential, yeah.
Yeah, and I think looking at the chat, Laura, I think you had a good comment in that, where one of the reasons we did this was to get your response as community members, not as experts. So we wanted, over the past several workshops, there's been a lot of opinions and thoughts generated from the group. And this was a good way to start to just get a pulse on it and quantify some of that, again, to inform, not determine.
And I would just add that I know the county is doing that. The county has had many opportunities for people who live in the county to talk about it, about what they want for the plans. And my understanding is that we are here as not only county residents, but Columbia residents. And so that's what I'm at least being mindful of, is how I want Columbia reflected in the county as changes occur. So if I'm not on the right track, then I've wasted many of everyone's hours. I apologize.
All right, I'm thinking maybe we should move on to policies. I see some comments, some detailed comments in the chat. I'm not sure. I think there's enough information there to give us the intent of your comments. So let's move on to policies, if that's okay.
So okay, so let's do that in the meat of the subject. Just a couple of bullets here. Just, first of all, thanks for all that did provide comments. We got actually more than half of the people of you responded with specific comments, some more, some less. And I think, we incorporated about 90% of them, I'm going to say, because they were good. They helped improve the content, they helped clarify, they helped improve my linguistic capabilities, which it's always good to work on. And there were a few not made. Some were made and about things that weren't covered, but they were actually covered elsewhere in the framework. There is some redundancy in the framework, and we know about that because we just felt because people talked about things in different locations as being important, so we actually allowed some of that redundancy to occur. And then there were some comments that just went against the grain of the sort of the overall thrust of the group and the previous surveys we had taken and input that we didn't include them, but there were very few of those. Most of them were refinements. So you all received, of course, you've received this a couple of times since our last workshop. You got one set to review and comment on what you did, and then there was another set that incorporated all the refinements. So we have the assumption here, given our time frame, that you have read it and you know what the basic content is, and you've got the latest one, I guess, last Friday. So we're going to be discussing things by exception. I'll be going through each topic and just hitting on some highlights and some general comments. So if there's something that you want to talk about, raise your hand, and as we go through each topic, we'll wait till we get all the way through, and then we can talk about the issues at the end. And if there's actually some definite disagreement, we've actually tried to use current technology. We have the ability to take a poll and a vote on a particular issue if one comes up that and if we 2/3 would decide that factor. And so this is I'm going to say the final draft, because as it goes, there will still be time for comments from the board as our final document goes out. So one of the things that was commented on early on is on these different topics, there really isn't an overarching sort of vision statement. We were in the weeds early without having, and we did that on purpose because we felt it was important. How do you write a vision without talking about the content first? And so what we've been doing over the last several months is talking about the content, and that allowed us to overview that content and compose some vision statements. I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it, and most of you have read it. And most of these have been changed a little bit. You made comments on these, and we did incorporate most of those comments in. So and they're long because there's a lot of dimension in these topics. So the first one's diversity, of course, and there was some refinement on defining what diversity really is, and it is a broader expanded definition these days. So we got some comments on that. We also got comments on diversity within CA itself, and we got in a little bit more detail in what diversity within the leadership means. So thank you for those comments. We also got some comments on the social equity piece and refining that a little bit, and that continues to be important, a founding principle, and expanded given sort of current attitudes and forces in culture today. Diversity in housing.
Sorry, do you want us to comment on when, like D?
We can do that. Sure, we can do that if we're going through. Sure.
Okay, just a quick one on D4. We're saying the counties, we're really relating to transportation here. I'm saying that the
transportation, right?
D4, where county's expense. I'm saying that also the county we should be looking at the county doing subsidies for low-income individuals that in order to get involved in community programs and facilities like CA does, the county should be doing the same. I don't know if they do or they don't. Work programs, whatever, subsidies, not just for the bus service. That's it.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. On housing.
Steve,
Yes.
Actually, before you go on, if I could make a comment, a couple of you are writing some comments in the chat about like words that should be added. That's helpful, but if you could do us a favor and put like the policy number or the name, like for example, we're on diversity now, just write that in because the chat doesn't really track necessarily with the slide. So that will help us in our note taking. If you could just say D.3 or whatever the number is or the policy we're on, that would be helpful. Thanks.
I do notice
Sorry.
though, Jessamine was very good. She said that it was in the vision statement, so that'll be very clear.
Yes.
Okay, good. On housing, of course, this is a pretty dense topic, so we had quite a few policies, and we did get input on those. We've sort of reduced the discussion on affordable housing specifically and talked more about a full spectrum of housing, although affordability is still, you know, identified as, because it is important, it's an important part of the community. We you know, talk about you know, market prices as the housing ages and how, you know, there needs to be continue to lower end of full spectrum housing in schools. Oh, this is on schools, right? Sorry about that. There was a number of comments about how the linkage between schools and housing is so important, and so we have that in here a couple places actually but both on two sides actually. One dimension being that, you know, as housing is built, we have to make sure that it doesn't impact the schools. And of course, there's tools that already do that. But also, we want to understand those impacts so that there isn't a artificial limitation on housing in the community. So are there any other points on diversity that you would like to bring up? Okay, it sounds like the chat room is
Sherry, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, I think when we talk about diversity of housing, we're not just talking about the economic structure, but we're also talking about types of housing. And the types of housing that have been provided, that was the ideal 50 years ago, is not necessarily going to be the ideal going forward. And just as younger people are more interested in mixed use, walkability, and these kinds of issues, even the size of housing, I think many of us have been disturbed over the years to see the increase in what is called luxury housing. And it's like the arms race. One developer puts something in, and then the next developer says that they're luxury housing too, and then it keeps going forward. Maybe within design standards or within you know, setting up some parameters that kind of dial back the luxury aspect. Because that's not where Columbia needs to be anymore. Columbia really needs to have fundamental housing for single people, for people on fixed incomes. I think that's one of the things that we are going to be seeing a lot more of in the future. And so we have to be more future oriented in our kinds of thinking about that. Thank you.
I think we do touch on that under redevelopment a little bit more, but we can strengthen that in this section as well.
Dick Bolton has his hand up. Tom's muted, so he can't say that.
I'm sorry, Dick Bolton.
Yeah, I went through this thing, printed out all 70.
Dick, you're
I'm
muted.
sorry, I muted you. I was trying to take your hand down and I muted you.
Okay.
Start over.
I just wanted to tell you, I've downloaded this whole thing and I've got lots of notes. There's some general things. First of all, we have a lot of stuff in here says we should do this or we should do that or we should have a study. I like to see it a little more forceful. I'd like to say a lot more, it needs to, instead of shoulds. And I'm going to write up tomorrow probably a number of comments, which I'll distribute, which I hope will go to everybody because I don't want to get out of line here. But I think there are a number of areas here where we really need to be a little more forceful. The other thing is I see things here about housing age. There's nothing wrong with old houses. You know, I grew up in a house that was over 100 years old, and it was a very nice house. If you go to Wild Lake, where Columbia began, you have some of the oldest houses in Columbia, and they're beautiful. The problem here is not the age of the house, it's how well it's been maintained. And also whether it fulfills a function today adequately. So let's not just write things off because they're old. Now, a lot of my other comments are just, you know, hopeless English major things. And as I said, I'll send you some kind of a summary of some things I think could be cleaned up a little.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Moving on to open space.
Sorry, Bryn had her hand up.
Is the chat feature disabled, or is it just that I did something on my computer?
I think it's your computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll figure
And
it out.
I'm
then.
sorry, I can't, for some reason, as the host, I can't see a raised hand. So Ann is my eyes for the raised hand, but I am looking at the chat.
That's fine. I was trying to put something
disabled.
in the chat.
It appears disabled for me too.
Oh, that's very odd.
Does for me too. This is Kristen.
Try it now.
Now it's back.
Okay, I must have accidentally hit a security code. I don't know how I did that, but sorry about that.
Okay, so moving on, the open space, we developed a vision statement, which is, I think, there was quite a bit of input on about the importance of the open spaces as its most prized asset, and need the full understanding of the components and optimize its value within the context of financial and environmental sustainability. There's a number of topics here, which I'm not going to read them all, but there's a lot of discussion on erosion and upstream management, and the need to. There's already a cooperative agreement with the county. However, there's a number of opinions that it needs to be strengthened, and there needs to be additional funding, and that also. The idea has been added about as developers sort of redevelop that maybe some of the responsibilities should be shared with redevelopment projects, at least for portions that are on their site. Because some questions about the county's ability to actually do, a sufficient level of work on this. So so all of those inputs were added. The trail network, there wasn't a lot of new information on or inputs on the trail network. I think we advised this several times before. Of course, a lot of interest in continuing to optimize the trail network, to improve it over time, to make it more interesting, to facilitate greater use, to maybe look at places where it could have an expanded modality, where one trail might become two for higher speed versus lower speed modes, especially as they get closer to village centers and so forth. So pretty quite a bit of language in there for that, and again, this idea of activating the trail system to increase use in areas that are used less. In terms of the facilities, not a lot of input on these from over the last couple of versions. General, positive satisfaction. I think there's issues, of course, with the budget that, is the last topic, in the framework. But I think we earlier on identified the need to relook at the facilities and make sure that they're in touch with the demographics and younger families and kids, and, are the tot lots as good as they could be? Are there other programs that could be aligned with millennials and younger families? And then there again, not a lot of discussion on the ecological component, just general agreement that we need to continue to understand the ecology of our open space system and perhaps push a little bit farther in terms of education, interpretive signage, and as improvements are made, reforestation, as redevelopment has impacts, to think in terms of biodiversity strategies. And this is coming from, I mean, this is what's going on around the country and with other master plan communities as well, is understanding the ecology really well. There's some discussion about expanding the open space system. We got some good comments on this and the theme was, you know, hodgepodge, incremental, additional open spaces really have limited value. If we're going to be if redevelopment comes along or there's an opportunity to add open space, first of all, it should be done if redevelopment occurs. That should be part of the deal, but also that it should be part of a cohesive system, and that it should be additive to the interconnectivity of the system and kind of make sense to the system and not be just you know, ad hoc. Some comments made about the fee in lieu policy, and that it's you know, it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that there should be more connection between the in lieu fees and specific projects that actually get developed, so that those funds just don't kind of disappear as they often do. I think this is kind of consistent with those. So those are the main topics in open space.
Yeah, I want to hit on Sherry. You had a comment about the environmental impacts and the climate impacts on the vulnerability and physical and financial. Did you see that needing to be added into a policy, or what was the?
I think if we just concentrate on stream erosion, we have, I mean, CA in general has been working on this issue on stream restoration and things of that kind. But what we're coming to understand now is that there is a larger context of climate shift. We are seeing much heavier rains. We are seeing much more volume of water. We're seeing lots more flooding. And so when you get to the flooding, that expands onto county roads, and it also certainly influences what is pouring into our lakes. So this larger context, as I understand it, a lot of people in the sustainability area are looking at regional types of plans. And that would be something that we might need to include something more here, because all development is going to be affected by these climate shifts. And right now, the county uses the 100-year floodplain and those kinds of documents, which are very much out of date. So we don't have good current information, and decisions are made about development in certain areas where we can't depend upon the way it looked even 50 years ago. It's just not the same.
So are you thinking more like watershed planning on a watershed basis and taking all the factors into consideration?
Yeah, because the water moves from one place to another. We know that it doesn't necessarily start here in Columbia and it doesn't end here. We are all interconnected. So we really have to look at that larger picture in terms of if we're going to look at strategies, if we're going to look at standards, if we're going to look at regulations.
Well, the other theme you're describing here is what we call resilience, right? I mean, as climate change, designing resilience into different components of our community. And it sounds like the open space system being so focused on drainage that, new projects and improvement projects needs to be designed with a resilience sort of philosophy. Because
That's great. That's a great word. Yeah.
That's what's happening all over the country, and that, you know, we're not going to turn climate change around, at least in our generations. So what do? You know, we have to plan for it, you know, so that it is the least destructive that it can be to our communities. So I think having a resilience policy, I think, is really a good idea. Ginny has her hand up.
You're muted.
Jenny, you had your hand up, but I know Bryn was waiting before you. Bryn, you typed in your comment. Did you want to ask that to the group?
I think they speak for themselves. That's okay.
Okay, great. All right, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Just to add to what Sherry was saying, the development of our drainage system by Rouse and the county is and was pathetic. So we need a plan, and you've just talked about that. Yes, we need it. It's not only costing us from an environmental point of view, it's costing the county and the state. The ponds that are getting filled up, the county's now going to have a lot of financial problems, the lakes, etc. But what my point is, we need to involve in this planning not only CA, you can't do it alone, not just the county. We need to get the state involved. They have open space money, etc., and federal government, again, in terms of any funding we can get. It has to be all four entities, and I don't see that really in all four represented here. So that's it.
So did you make that in a chat note with those, again, those entities? Are those documented someplace? Tom,
I just recorded them.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I don't see anyone else in the chat on this topic.
So on civic engagement, you know, we started off defining this as sort of participation in cultural events and civic gatherings, and we expanded it because we got good input that it also has to do with participation in governance, and also in participation by multiple demographics, and rather versus, you know, and I see this in every city. There tends to be the older generations tend to be the ones getting involved, and so pushing back against that a little bit. So, you know, we talk about program facilities, and we suggested initially that CA would sort of have a fairly strong role in curating and making sure that we've got the broadest array. We got pushback on that idea that it's not really CA's job to do that. There are a lot of other entities and institutions in the community that can do that. However, CA can certainly assist and partner as needed to facilitate, you know, the ongoing evolution of those. We talked a little bit about using technology to, the other master plan communities have some fairly advanced technology in the form of apps and web pages that are exclusive to the community, where there's a lot of organic affinity, group growth, and a lot of communication. And so we suggested this early on, got some good input on this to, broaden our don't be too detailed, leave it open, leave it broad, because this is an area that is changing rapidly. The different platforms are changing. And we added text that talks about making sure that we're educating newcomers about governance, about the community and what's going on. So I think we improved this particular policy, significantly. And here we're talking about the civic participation, as well as just events, but also getting involved and also bringing in good diversity of representation into leadership. So those are the main topics under civic engagement. Any thoughts on those?
Renee had a question. Renee?
I'm confused. I thought we were putting together a document or a position on HoCo by design. And I don't see where civic engagement has anything to do with our master plan. I don't disagree with a lot of the stuff in it. I'm just saying, I'm not sure what it's doing in this document.
I think we saw the document as being multifaceted.
Well-
The original RFP and our proposal was a broader sort of goal of sort of looking at Columbia, moving into the 21st century, and sort of looking at a variety of aspects, one of which would provide input into the general plan process. But it was
Okay,
never
so
being exclusively, for that purpose.
I guess this is not your fault. This is not, okay. We went through a very lengthy strategic planning process, of which many of these things could fit into it. But I don't feel like we should be rewriting what we did a year ago and paid thousands of dollars to do in this process and still not have what we need to effectively work on HoCo by design. But I will be quiet, so.
Kristen, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
I think that the scope of this will generally be applicable to HoCo by design, but the vision that we set forth should also be applicable to all projects that we review and all of our engagement with the county. So while the most immediate project or undertaking of Howard County's that we are anticipating, and that which set the kind of the time frame or the urgency of doing this is certainly HoCo by design. But what it's twofold. What goes into HoCo by design can include topics of civic engagement, but more importantly, our ongoing relationship with the county, whether that be, just normal, the relationship that we're going to have in, indefinitely or, forever into the future, or even as we are reviewing development proposals. All of those should be informed by this document that our consultants are facilitating here. So you're correct in saying that HoCo by design is, the main impetus for this, but I think there are other, other occasions that this is intended for as well.
Okay, but our vote at the board level was on working with consultants to determine what we wanted to do with the master plan. And so now you're telling me that senior management changed that vote.
No, this
has nothing to do with the master plan.
Well, the master.
I will be quiet from now on.
Okay.
Dick has his hand up.
Yes, I agree with Renee. We went into this thing because the county is planning to change zoning. We were very concerned about what effect it was going to have on Newtown zoning. And that should be the total focus of this. CA has, as Renee pointed out, went through a long process of coming up with a strategic plan for the next 5 years, which addresses a lot of these questions about civic engagement, about bringing more people, greater diversity into the leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a whole different bucket. There's also stuff in here about how CAs should be selling properties. That's not part of this. What this is about is what we want to see the county do for the entire Columbia development zone to make Columbia give Columbia a higher quality of life. And this other stuff is just a distraction. I think it should come out.
Justin, you had some disagreement with that. Did you want to talk?
I hear what they're saying, and I think there's a fair point to that we do want to make sure that this document is very focused on the general plan, so that is clear. However, I don't think that everything that we've discussed here, if it's not relevant to the general plan, should be tossed out. I think it's helpful to put some of what we are looking at in terms of housing and development within the context of what we want to see in Columbia as a whole. So I think there's some benefit to having it there. It may be the kind of thing where we could restructure the document a little bit to sort of have maybe, here's the context that we're working in. These are sort of where CA sees itself going, implementing, like Renee said, there is some overlap with our strategic plan. However, a strategic plan is more of an internal document, and this is going to be something that's going to be shared with outside entities that we can sort of say, hey, you don't forget, these are our goals for Columbia. So, we want to make sure that those are seen as you make your decisions as well. So I guess I'm not in total disagreement. I totally get what Renee's saying, and I don't think we want to get in the weeds with sort of like getting off base with what we're trying to do here. But I also think that some of the information that we've captured here is very valuable, and we should hold on to it somehow. That's my 2 cents.
Ori has his
Ori.
hand.
Ori.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just looking at Brad's comment with which I agree, namely that this document is input into CA, which will inform your input into the county. It's not meant to be directly the document to the county that shapes Columbia's position on the general plan. The notion and the work scope, frankly, that we responded to from CA was we need to get our act together in general so as to know what we think our planning vision is to be able to appropriately communicate with the county. And it may well be that some of the things here overlap with things that aren't relevant to the county and the HoCo by design, and you may have covered, such as civic engagement, but certainly a lot of other things are directly relevant to your vision, and you're coming together to converge on what points you want to make to the county and to HoCo by design. So it's some of both.
Renee?
So I think we should just let you finish your thing. I've asked for a copy of the RFP. We will take it up with Milton and the senior staff. So just go ahead and finish. Thank you very much for your comments.
Moving on to housing.
Dick actually has his hand up.
Hey, Dick.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't know how to take my hand down. Yeah, I think you may have gotten some bad direction here, and we'll have to discuss this internally. We'll try to make sure that you got the right information here.
Well, the housing topic certainly is on point, with the general plan, and the general, and I think one of the reasons we kept sending you surveys about housing was because it is such an important input into the general plan process.
Steve, it's 8 o'clock. Do we want to maybe take a break and then hit housing after the break? Or
sure.
All right. Why don't we come back at 8:10?
Okay.
Steve, could you raise your hand? No, at the bottom of the participants list.
Oh. Well, see, I don't have the ability to do anything because I'm in slide presentation mode. Oh, here it is. Hold on.
Anne's conducting a test for my benefit.
I can't do it because I'm a co-host.
I have the side-by-side gallery displayed, but I never see any blue hands. So that's.
Here. Okay, I finally found it. I just raised it.
You should see a hand in front of.
Okay, yeah, now I see it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's in two places. It's on his picture and it's beside his name.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
When my day job gets boring, I can moonlight as a Zoom.
There you go. You misspoke. Wear that Zoom t-shirt.
I think the parsing out those policies that are directly relevant to the general plan is a pretty good idea.
Actually,
All right,
guys, how did they ever get in there? Actually, how did they ever get in there? Now I'm thinking about it. Like civic engagement and stuff like that.
Well, the whole, from the very beginning, we took the fundamental principles that Rouse sort of established, and we used those as the outline. Those is the approach. So there are like 4 or 5 key principles. And then we started saying, okay, we're going to take each one of those principles, look at what he originally intended, and then talk about them in sort of the emerging 21st century Columbia. That's
so diversity and civic engagement don't belong in there, really, right?
Well,
you could argue that.
In the RFP, I'll just read you the core.
No, I don't want to get in an argument about the RFP. I'm just
anyway,
saying,
it is about big picture goals.
Yeah. In terms of what we're going to hand the county, it's related to Newtown and the diversity and civic engagement. I didn't think of it before until it was just raised. Really, I don't see sending that on to the county. Maybe I'm missing it. And I don't
think that was ever the intent. I think this was meant to be a broader document out of which certain policies were pulled out, extracted, and used to inform the county.
Which is good, but yeah,
All right, it's 8:12, so why don't we get started? I see there's a number of comments related to housing in the chat bar, but why don't we let Steve go through the housing segment and then we can go and discuss some of those comments.
Sure. Well, the vision statement, embraces the notion of additional housing in Howard County and in Columbia, for a number of reasons, which we've talked about, and then we've had a number of studies that we've shared that sort of articulate those. But there's clearly has been articulated a need to pull that into sort of an overall housing vision, and also a need to attract a greater variety of housing types, which was discussed earlier. The first set of policies really sort of talk about creating an overall vision for housing, and I think part of the surveys that we just completed and a number of the other policies try and do that, try to form that up, but it needs to be organized as articulated in this first policy, and then it talks about kind of where housing should occur, and we've seen in the survey reinforcement that village centers are an opportunity because they need to be sort of evolving anyway because of the retail issues, and so housing can help be a part of that as well as help fund some of that. And then the redevelopment areas and the commercial corridor areas, well, of course, in addition to downtown Columbia, which is where the primary source of additional housing is, but Gateway and Dobbin Road becomes secondary, opportunities. Then we talk a little bit about low income housing, and I think it was identified fairly early on that the distribution of income housing is not optimal. It should be more widely distributed within Columbia and then also within the county overall. Although there are a few voices that say, well, Columbia kind of is the urban areas of the county should be the locations for those because that's where the services are. But generally, we have in here discussion about distribution. That would be good input in the into the general plan update. Here we touch again on housing and school capacity, and acknowledging both sides of the coin, that housing school capacity needs to be incorporated into the redevelopment process, and as it has been and is. But on the other hand, there are other dimensions of school capacity, also the demographics of student generation in new housing that probably isn't as well understood as it could be. And so that needs to be better understood so that school capacity doesn't become a proportionate impact on housing. And this is where, in this particular housing distribution within the county, we talk about in the general plan that there needs to be a broader distribution of affordable housing, and an opportunity to get greater diversity across the county in terms of housing. However, it should be, as identified earlier on, though, it should be linked to go to places where it makes sense, linked to good services, infrastructure, schools, and transit. And then part of the general plan should be a housing vision plan that does look at the distribution of housing types, taking the current characteristics of each village into consideration. Talk a little bit more here about the mix of housing. That it's not just there's a whole variety of housing types. Of course, low income, which we've talked about, but also I think it was brought up earlier, mid-price housing, workforce housing. And that the organic growth in lower and mid-price housing should be supported without getting into a lot of regulatory, requirements. But and this is where it starts to brush up against the fact that guidelines need to be refined, village center focus plans, and a more streamlined approval process if this redevelopment, new housing is going to occur in a manner that's consistent with Columbia's character. We start talking a little bit about ADUs. We saw, and not just ADUs, but that there's a whole variety of different housing types, ADUs, micro units, and we had in here because we're aware of what's going on in other master plan communities. There's a much more fine-grained mix of housing types and an evolution of typologies that's occurring out there. A lot of it is small lot detached, cluster housing, mixed townhomes and flats, even co-housing. And so, those types of new sort of evolutionary housing should be considered in redevelopment projects. And then also an acknowledgement of smaller redevelopment opportunities and underutilized sites that are scattered around the community. And then we've added, one of the comments was, multi-generational housing, and there are a number of builders across the country and developers that are doing multi-generational housing, floor plans and housing types that allow expanded families to live, and that should be considered as well. And here's where we get into a little bit of the existing neighborhoods, which we saw in our recent survey didn't have a lot of support amongst you all in terms of the voting, but the opportunity is for sort of finer grained, smaller incremental housing to be expanded within the neighborhoods by housing being expanded into duplexes or triplexes if a lot is sufficient size, of course, accessory dwelling units. And then, we do address the so-called mansionization, and that there should be some consideration for controlling size and neighborhood impact. We mentioned ADUs, and there needs to be, I think we're just acknowledging there needs to be more work done on ADUs so that the right sort of size and relationship to maximum coverage on the lot is addressed, and are they added or are they freestanding? But ADUs now, as you are, I'm sure, aware, are being a major mechanism across the country for providing additional housing at sort of workforce pricing levels. There's also a discussion of new housing character, and we talked about early on about relooking at guidelines within the villages or at least maybe overall defining what is Columbia, what are the signature components of Columbia, so that as new higher density redevelopment projects are proposed, that they can be developed in a manner that is tasteful and incorporates into village character to the extent possible. And that this idea of village center focal planning, where each of the even though there are village center plans that have occurred, each one has one, but engaging in those, bringing some back up to date, and this general planning process, the charrette process, provides the opportunity to do some of that work. And then just an acknowledgement that for any of the above to actually get traction, there needs to be a look at the redevelopment approval process, NT zoning, focal area plans. All these things need to be, the county needs to be engaged in moving those forward. And the governance section sort of starts to address that, which we'll get to at the end as the last component. Comments on housing?
Yeah, it's been a very active chat. So I'm going to try and go down from the order they came in. I know, Jenny, you had a couple comments related to small lot, single family. What do they mean? Does it mean zero lot lines? Columbia's had patio homes. You had questions on micro units and a question about explaining policy H15. So yeah. Steve, do you want to maybe talk a little more about some of the micro units? And
may I add one more question to that? In a quick look at this morning and again now, I don't see any acknowledgement of the need to deconcentrate of existing affordable housing. We'll move the farm rates lower and come more to an average for the county. I don't see anything on the farm rates or even mention of farm rates here, which is a big issue in at least some areas.
Well, I mean, H4, low-income housing, is too concentrated in several villages. Redevelopment opportunities over time should be utilized to decentralize this type of housing within Columbia and Howard County.
Okay, but I guess one of the suggestions I had gotten from somebody is to tie it into the farm rate as to eventually wind up with that area having the same farm rate as the average in the Howard County. We don't mention farm rate at all. That was it. The rest are just questions that I had on what exactly do you mean, but I think you just answered some of it.
Okay. Let me go.
ADUs in terms of that's allowed as a conditional use outside of Columbia, but not in Columbia. Is that correct?
I actually think that the issue is that it has to be attached to the existing building. So you can't have a separate unit, a separate small unit.
If you can't even do that in Columbia, you can't do that, right?
Steve, could you explain the ADU recommendation? He's frozen.
Sorry, was that question to me, Anne?
No, that was to Steve. Could you?
Well, I think Uri might be able to.
Oh, yeah, if you want to do the ADU.
So many of the counties in central Maryland are liberalizing their ADU policies, relaxing the square footage constraint, and allowing them to be freestanding. Howard counties are kind of in the middle. They're fairly constraining. As was pointed out, they require the building to be connected. There's some limit on the square footage. And so while they're allowed, they're constrained. And presumably that'll be up for review as part of the zoning revisions eventually, and maybe the general plan could even opine on the topic. And I understand that within the villages, there are additional constraints potentially because of covenants.
That was my question. I had been hearing that what you said is true outside of Columbia, but Columbia, Newtown zoning doesn't even permit it. In addition, you have the covenants, but it could just be the covenants that are
I think it's probably the covenants. For the most part, the PDFs probably, or the FDPs rather, probably reference existing zoning standards.
Thank you.
And I do want to draw your attention to H8, where we say school adequacy metrics focus primarily on capacity. The issue of social equity and clustering of low-income student population should also be addressed in housing and related student distribution strategies. So that's the policy that is meant to address the farm issue. Maybe it's not strong enough, is what you're saying.
The next person was Dick Bolton.
Hello again. One of the things about the APFO regulations is they lapse after 3 years. And one of the problems we're having in Dorsey Search is we've got a developer who developed a plan that would have overloaded the schools. 3 years have passed, and now his original plan is back up. There was a move to increase the APFO to 5 years, and that got shot down. So that's that's something to take into consideration. The other thing is on lot size. Lots in Columbia are pretty much all quarter acres. There are a few that are bigger, but there are no big lots in Columbia where you can stick another building. And in addition to that, when you have more than one family living in a single family house, you get parking problems. And I think in areas in the non-Columbia parts of, in the outparcel parts, you can see the houses that have, 6, 7 cars parked out front, either on the street, in the driveway, or even on the front lawn. So that's another issue that comes up. And I think that my biggest problem is that the lot size covenants, the ones that say how much of the lot you can cover, are not being enforced. We've had 2 cases that came up over the past couple of years where people wanted to increase their building size, one by 40%, as I recall, in order to put a new sunroom in. And how it got past the RAC, I do not understand. How it got past our planning and zoning people, I do not understand. And I believe, I don't think, I think I have it right. There was somebody else who wanted to move their property line or get closer to their property line than the rules allowed. And it seems to me that if you have these rules, they have to be kept. You can't be making exceptions.
So does that infer a support for ADUs as long as those issues are addressed, adequately addressed?
Well, one of the things that happens is you build a mother-in-law unit, and if it's got a kitchen in it, when mom dies, you bring a renter in, and then you've got the car. Then you've got all the other problems. For example, the cars filling up the driveway, and the additional noise and nuisance in the neighborhood. We have neighborhoods that have certain character, and I do believe, and I'm speaking not as somebody who lives in a single family detached house, I'm in a townhouse, but I see these neighborhoods that are nearby and they have character. They have a certain look to them, a certain feel to them. And when you start putting multiple families into a single family house, you destroy that character.
Okay.
Going to go to Sherry next.
Thank you. I was going to just focus for a minute also on the ADUs. I know I've been in other communities where there are lots of people who use those ADUs as part of Airbnb. So, another thing that we would have to think about is, are these going to be used as permanent living facilities? Or do we need some kind of regulation? I do understand that for seniors who have something like that, it becomes a source of income, and that can be very significant to aging in place. So I'm not saying that I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying it's something that has to be taken into consideration as far as the broader picture is concerned. Some of the smaller types of units that I've seen, like a cluster of tiny houses, or clustered housing where there is a central eating area, or where there are shared laundry facilities. These are really, many of these have been brought about because of sustainability issues. And I think that that's something that we haven't really experimented with in our community here. I think there may be places where that could be a possibility, attached to solar units that supply electricity. This is a different kind of approach. It's a creative, future-looking approach. And I look at a place like, for example, the RV park, sort of tucked away, could become the site for some kind of pilot project. So I think we have to think in terms of, could we begin to pilot some things before we start writing things into regulations? Could we actually attempt to do some things with some of these creative developers around the country who would be willing to pilot a project for us? That's a suggestion. And I do finally want to echo the issue about, if we say we need more housing, not different housing, then we're inevitably going to need more schools, more roads. And the cost of building roads right now, if we are looking at financial sustainability, over $1 million for a mile of road. We've looked at some fantastically expensive projects, not just here in our county, but in the state of Maryland. So I think ultimately we're going to have to rethink some of these ideas about building new and turn more towards a European approach, which is, how can we reuse, repurpose what we have. And I think Jenny mentioned something before about the mall or about any of the older sort of strip types of commercial areas that could become clustered housing. So I think there's some room for some really creative thinking about this before we get to regulation and just maybe release to some interesting pilot projects.
Thank you, Sherry. I think it's 8:30, so I'm going to suggest, Steve, maybe you move on to the next topic. I think we have transportation redevelopment and governance.
Right, and I think that your comment leads in part into transportation. We actually had a whole new policy suggested in our latest comments, and I think it relates a little bit to what you're saying, and that is that we were talking in our policies about various aspects of transportation, but we didn't really come out and say that there really needs to be an integrated transportation and redevelopment approach, whereas new redevelopment is occurring, that it is required to demonstrate that it is part of a more forward-leaning transportation philosophy. So it's not just about building more roads for more single occupancy cars, but the location and densities of redevelopment would be part of a multimodal and more sustainable transportation concept with active mobility, as well as potential other. We've been there's proposals for BRT and expanded shuttle programs and so forth. That this should all be working together into a integrated philosophy and approach and strategy. So that's brand new. And then we talk about just the new technologies that are being used across the country, mobility hubs, MOS, mobility as a service, and integrating those technologies and those innovations to try and facilitate non-single auto trip generation. Then we talk about active mobility just in general and how it relates to the trail system. Maybe looking at expanded bike share, including electric bikes, which are becoming, again, more predominant in other parts of the country. Let's see, keep going here. Again, more on active mobility, and using mobility hubs. Transit-oriented development, because it's sort of acknowledging that you can talk about modalities, but if you don't have the destinations that support them and facilitate them, they're going to be less effective. And so think as new development comes on the horizon, looking at the village, downtown Columbia, the corridor areas, and thinking of them as transit-oriented developments that have the mix of uses and have sufficient density that they can support future mobility options more effectively. We call this transit-ready planning. And so transit-ready planning should be a part of these areas as they are envisioned. And then a little bit on the infrastructure adequacy kind of guidelines that require redevelopment to mitigate within proximity of the project any traffic impacts. And as we talked to the county transportation planners, they suggested that even though it's important to do that if there are in lieu fees that come out of developments, that they should be also looking at larger systems and larger, sort of more innovative transportation solutions rather than just creating, wider streets and more streets. So that should be looked at. And then just a general acknowledgement that transportation dynamics are changing, and that we need to be looking at the impacts of autonomous vehicles post-COVID, work at home trending, that could, as new development is proposed, that we don't use antiquated metrics to evaluate them and plan for their transportation impacts. So those are kind of the main points.
Yeah, Jenny, your question, the bridge over 29, are you referring to the bridge that connects to Oakland Mills, the pedestrian bridge, or what bridge are you?
Yeah, the Bridge Columbia that goes downtown from Oakland Mills downtown. There's always been a lot of talk about maybe another lane, you know, and I noticed you left that off as possible bike and or even autonomous buses, et cetera.
Left off discussion of the bridge per se, you're saying? Okay.
Yes, it's not here as an option. Also, quick read, I think like Little Patuxent Parkway, Broken Land, some of those wider roads, maybe there's a way of working out, allowing more bike and other types of transit on those roads.
Sort of complete streets program.
Yeah, look at everything, yeah. Well, you did say complete streets, so if that was covered in complete streets, then it's covered, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how clearly it's articulated. Let's make note of that and relook at
it. I don't see any other comments on this section in the chat or,
Dick
oh,
has
I'm sorry,
his
Dick.
hand up.
Dick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, real quickly, I'm not sure if this is in the scope of what we're doing here, but my biggest transportation frustration is getting downtown. And by downtown, I mean Baltimore and Washington. It's really agonizing. You got to drive down there. I'm used to living in places where you just jump on a subway. I wish there was some way we could get to enjoy the resources that Baltimore and Washington have without the big McGill of getting there.
Okay. Well, I mean, that translates into, you know, engaging and more active support on regional transportation
Yeah,
improvement.
it's a regional question. You're right.
And the BRT is certainly one that's out there that could be helpful.
I've tried them all, and you want to go to Washington, you don't get there till 10 in the morning, and you got to leave at 5, and it just doesn't give you a lot of time to spend.
Okay. So moving on to redevelopment, you know, I think we're just acknowledging in the vision statement that it's a tool, you know, for reinvigorating, re-energizing, repositioning, you know, parts of the community that we've talked about. The village, of course, the downtown is the primary example, but also the village centers, as well as some of these commercial corridors, and those can help us help us on transportation if they're done in certain manners we just talked about, as well as achieving this better balanced housing distribution that we do have several policies that address, but we need tools to achieve that housing distribution, and redevelopment is one of those. So we kick it off by talking about the village centers, which we saw in our survey. Everybody acknowledges is an opportunity and a need. Some have already been done, some are in process, some need to be looked at. And so we start with those. And then we talk about, though, the issues with redevelopment. And there's a concern about the character of redevelopment. And so it needs to be done in a manner that sort of is consistent with Columbia character to the extent that's possible. And I think the one policy that you asked about earlier was a response to that. And it was, you know, how do you do higher density, sort of more quasi-urban housing, which is kind of, or mixed use, and have it be consistent with Columbia community character. It's a little bit of a, you know, it's a challenge. And so I think we were trying to find language that said that it's possible if we can define an urban character that has attributes that do allow it to fit into Columbia by controlling height, controlling architectural style, massing, landscape, and so forth. So I think we did try and infer that in one of the earlier policies. So this is just saying, this can occur, but it needs to occur in a manner that is a good fit for the community. And also we again tackle the affordable housing issue here and say that there should be a fair share apportionment of that across the county as a result of the general plan, update. We talk about the commercial corridors as being prime opportunities for providing housing as well as jobs. We were corrected with some comments that it's not all about housing in these. It really needs to be mixed use, needs to be additional jobs, and needs to be retail. So these become key opportunities for mixed use, development of appropriate proportions. And we're also, there were some comments that came in on, there are commercial developments and business parks that actually also should receive improvements in terms of architecture, landscape, signage, lighting, to elevate their quality more consistently with the expectations of the Columbia community. And then we acknowledge here again the GPU focus area charrette process as an opportunity to look at some of these areas and kind of flesh them out and come up with some proposals as part of the general plan process. We talk about retail. There's a concept here that we should look at retail in a more holistic manner. It was brought to our attention, which I guess it had been earlier, but we didn't put it in here, that there had been a retail study about 5 or 6 years ago. We looked at the study. It was fairly general, and it didn't necessarily go into the level of detail that a study could go. Because we see studies all the time and participate in them that say, here's a village, here are the village centers, here are the corridors, here's kind of the types of retail that should go into there that aren't overly competitive with each other. These are holistic retail strategy plans, and just sort of coming in as an outsider and looking at some of the retail issues that you have, it just seems like it's something that you should build on the 2014 study and go to a little bit more detail, as well as expand the uses to be not just about retail, but to be also about civic uses and cultural uses and other things that could be a part of these village centers. And then we talk a little bit about opportunities for older sites that those should be considered, as long as they're done in a manner that is consistent with the community character. And that maybe there's some opportunity for the county to participate in these and acquisition of some of these parcels, and to again move in the direction of a better distribution of mixed income housing around Columbia and the county. And then we come back full circle now to transportation, even though it's a little redundant, because it kept being brought up that these two things go together. I mean, transportation and redevelopment. Because if we're going to add housing and not impact our roadways, we need to do it with the highest level of internal trip capture and in a manner that supports the expansion of transit, even the conventional bus system, but also BRT, autonomous vehicle, autonomous shuttles, and active mobility. And then we circle back around again and touch on school planning, even though we did talk about it earlier, that as well as other types of new housing redevelopment should be done in lockstep with the with the school system. That's a lot of number of key ideas there. Thoughts?
I think I'm going to say, we talk about the village centers as though they're all pretty much the same deal, and they're not. Each one of them is a different situation. Some have better access to arterial roads than others do. Some of them have. Some of them are very successful. River Hills Shopping Center, very successful. Dorsey Search, very successful. And by the way, we have more than just retail there. We have a lot of medical offices that are close by. Others need to have housing. Wild Lake, I think, had a pretty successful renovation because they were able to put people there to buy stuff. who just weren't there before. And in other cases, it's the kind of housing that surrounds a shopping center, long reach. It has a lot of low income housing, which is pretty much destroyed the village center. You go there now and they've got a police station, a laundromat, and a fried chicken place, and that's about it. You need to put some more upscale housing in that area in order to give that shopping center an opportunity to actually provide to be sustainable. You mentioned that study that had been made a few years ago. That was absolutely worthless. I made no recommendation. Somebody just went through and counted the stores. I don't want to ever see another study like that ever done.
That was our observation as well. I was looking for it, but we actually have a sentence in here that says every village center is different and needs to have a unique approach. So it's in here somewhere. But I think the whole idea of doing these village center area plans allows each one to have its own customized, unique approach. That's the whole idea. Others? You're on mute, Tom.
I'm sorry. Jenny? Jenny?
You're on mute.
I didn't raise my hand.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you had a question in the.
Yeah, it was just, I assume the study you were referring to.
Okay.
The CA, Columbia Association, and the Economic Development Study.
Okay.
Is that the one? You're not talking about the Oakland Mills market study?
No, it was an overall study that of all commercial
CA.
retail.
Yeah, I wasn't clear. It just said market study. You meant the CA one, I guess. Okay.
And Sherry, you had a question, the future of bricks and mortar shopping, working at home influence. Did you want to talk more about that?
I have some concern, and this is in general for planning, because we seem to be at an inflection point. And the idea that people are, in the same way that the first mall transformed America, we seem to be at a point where we're questioning the large malls and other kinds of brick and mortar types of stores. People are interested in experiences. And so the experience that you get by going to a place seems to be part of the whole process. Otherwise, you can just click online and get what you need. So I think Columbia is built around experiences. That was what was always such a driver, the experience of the outdoors. It influences everything here in Columbia, the experience of the lakes, the experience of the topography of the land. So I think we have to really think about what kinds of experiences are we creating for people, not just the aesthetics of the buildings, but what are the buildings doing in terms of community? So maybe there is a community function to retail that we haven't fully explored. And again, I'm thinking about some of the places that I have, visited in the past, where I don't remember what I bought there, but I sure remember the experience of being there. So we have to sort of, shift our thinking. And then also, how many more people might be continuing to work at home? And what does that say about our employment corridors and the rest? Even though we have been very successful in the past, what does this portend for the future? So I guess I'm asking, where can we go to get more information about that? What would be your suggestion as we are trying to look out into the future? What can we be looking at?
Those are really good questions. I think on the, office first, the jury's just completely out on office. And if Erin were here, she would say that there are counter indicators related to office. There's and that there are indicators that there will be still a very strong demand for office, maybe at lower at lower intensities of capacity. But and then there's others, of course, this whole work at home thing. There are whole industries that are reconsidering how they do business. So I think right now my observation of the landscape on that is everybody's kind of waiting to see a little bit what happens. I think retail is different. I mean, retail is completely transforming, and that's why I think it'd be really interesting to bring in some professionals. There are people that have a lot more expertise than us that live only in the retail and world, and are at the center of experiential retail. The whole public market movement, the food hall movement, the outdoor food fair movement, food as an event, as an activity. These are all things that didn't exist 10 years ago. And they are all about people-to-people interaction, people watching, getting out, having experience. And so that's why we're kind of suggesting that you have a more comprehensive, holistic look at the whole retail scene, and see and do some visioning just specifically in that arena, especially for your village centers, because they need it the most. You want to continue those to be the centers of your villages in terms of activity and drawing people in.
Yeah, Sherry, I think that was really a good way to highlight it. We're using the word experience and not just, it's related to retail too, but the outdoor and the lakes and everything.
I wrote that
else.
down. Community of experiences. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
Okay. Thank you. That was the only
hand up, although I think we also have to move on to governance. So Tom, you can decide.
Yeah. I see Dick's hand. Is anyone else's hand up?
No.
Okay, Dick, if you can make it quick.
I'll make it very quick. In all of our discussions, we have not said much about the mall. And I think we need to remember the mall, all of the anchor stores in the mall are in deep financial trouble. Sears is already closed. Lord Taylor is shutting down. And the rest of them are shaky. And so we may find in a year from now that whole mall needs to be re-envisioned. That's it.
Okay.
Governance.
So I think there's an overarching sentiment that there needs to be a more effective partnership with the county. Of course, the general plan update, is the door to walk through on that and just leverage that to the greatest extent. We heard a lot of discussion about restructuring the NT zoning. We've talked about revising development standards and a more efficient redevelopment process. Those seem to be the key components. So we tackle each one of those. And it starts with the sort of relationship between Howard County and CA and Columbia, and making sure that there's strong input into that process. We've talked about that earlier, and that there are components of this document that are meant to do that. And also, the master planning dimension of that for Columbia needs to be fairly comprehensive, and that the charrette portions of the process provide an opportunity to look at a lot of the areas we've been talking about. And you voted on those earlier, and we saw which ones you thought were most important to be looking at. A lot of discussion about design standards for redevelopment, and this sort of tension between wanting, nobody's going to redevelop without increasing density. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it's the density delta, as we say in the redevelopment business, that determines feasibility for change. And so the challenge is how do you do density without having negative impacts on the character of the community? And that has to do with location. It has to do here with talking about refining development standards and guidelines that really capture those key Columbia character components that can be incorporated into projects of higher density. And that the village boards are obviously a very important part of that process. and that the NT zoning, we had a big discussion about a completely different approach to the NT zoning that gets away from the detailed, final plans. And that also the open space component, there's always hands being raised this is all fine in terms of redevelopment and so forth, but the open space component needs to be defined, and protected. And then the last one here, I think there's a question of whether it should even be in here. That's been raised several times. We've left it in here so that it could be discussed. But I think so. Anyway, those are the key governance points. Uri, do you want to add any color to this section?
I don't think so, Steve, yet. I can chime in if there's comments.
Yeah, I think the comment we have, Bryn, you have a question about development and redevelopment related to high density and not?
Yeah, I think we talked about this before when we were talking about development, but if somebody could just remind me why it's feasible to develop initially without high density, but then to do any kind of redevelopment seems to require high density.
Well, part of it is very pragmatic, and that is that you have let's say you have an apartment project that is, by today's standards, fairly modest density, and you want to redevelop it into something more cutting edge and micro units, co-housing, and of course and maybe mixed use and incorporate retail and some of the cool placemaking things that we've been talking about. Well, when you have you have an asset that has an existing income stream, you basically decapitate that income stream for several years while you're actually developing the project, and so that becomes an additional cost to the project. And so that the only way you can pick up all the soft and hard costs of redevelopment is to have a density that allows a significantly higher income stream to offset all of those costs. Now, higher density doesn't mean super high density. I mean, you could have a low, density is relative. It just means that it's more than what was there before. But when we worked and looking at different areas for redevelopment, the ability to increase density was a key component to it even being worth looking at from an economic standpoint.
Thank you.
You've learned it's hard for me to give short answers. I apologize.
Dick, you have your hand up.
You're muted, Dick.
Yeah. Before we end this thing, I want to say you guys have done a great job in bringing a lot of stuff together in a coherent fashion, and I really do appreciate it. And I don't want you to take any of my criticism personally. I mean, there's just so much here to go over. One of the things that was mentioned is CA's financial situation. That's a temporary deal. It doesn't really belong in here. Like a lot of industries that involve entertainment, fitness, whatever, we've been hit, and we are adjusting our budget accordingly. And I would say within a year or two, we'll be back up just the way we were before, with our $80 million budget, et cetera. And we'll be able to do a lot of this stuff. The thing that really concerns me is we go through all this and I think we're a little naive about our cooperation with the county. The county is not a friend of CA. The county has their own planning and zoning department that really doesn't like us in their knickers. They want to run the whole county on the same zoning. They don't want us in the way, and we've seen this over and over and over and over again. So that is going to be a hurdle that we're going to have to overcome as we present this document down the road. The thing that we really need is a regional plan for Columbia. And there is I think something I saw recently, it's on the map, in fact, that you showed earlier, is the Columbia, what was it called? A Columbia Development Plan or region or zone. Don't remember the exact name of it. But that's what we need. We need something within a set of borders, and everything in it should be run by the same rules. I mentioned in an email to Kristen that what we have is like raisin bread. You got little spots of beautiful urban planning, suburban planning, and then it's just surrounded by chaos. And until we can draw the whole thing together and use the same standards throughout that area, we're in a losing battle. So yeah, that's where I want to leave that.
Thank you, Dick. And then Bryn, the last comment maybe we'll take, and then we'll talk about next steps. Bryn, you just said there's some confusion about citizens about the role of Columbia associations, responsibilities or influence versus the county, and that impacts civic engagement. Do you have anything you wanted to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think it relates back to Dick's comment. You know, people don't understand what area is Columbia, what areas are not Columbia, and then they don't understand the role of the Columbia Association versus the role of the county. And, you know, I think it impacts particularly civic engagement. I don't need to expand any further, but thank you.
Sure. Okay, it's a little after 9. So I think some of our next steps that we're going to go through here include, we'll summarize the notes from this work session and distribute them. We'll take the input and, continue to massage some of these policies. We have, as Kristen mentioned, we'll have a draft plan. I think we were talking about January 8th, and then a final plan January 22nd. So again, we really appreciate everyone's very active participation over the past 7 workshops. Everyone obviously cares a lot about Columbia and its future, and that shows in the level of engagement that you've had. And we really appreciate it and enjoyed the opportunity to work with you. Any of the other team members want to say anything, or Kristen or Jessica?
Well, I'm just going to jump in and say I was really not sure what this process was going to end up being like, and what its character would be. But I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I've learned a lot. And hopefully we've brought something, to the process. And we'll continue to refine this document based on the comments that we got tonight. And thanks for letting us be a part of some revisioning of this very important community in the country. Thanks.
All right, so we'll sign off. I think the team will stay on for a couple minutes to coordinate next steps. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.